الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا.
Let's start with what's quite a striking chart, just showing you economic activity in the manufacturing sector in China. And here you have the biggest plunge that we've seen in this index. It's a measure of just how much activity is going on in the manufacturing sector. Anything above the line is expansion, anything below is contraction. Just look at how much it plunged, even more as a result of COVID-19 and the shutdowns we've seen in China than at any point going back to the financial crisis. Worse, in fact, than many months of the financial crisis.
But COVID-19 has savaged the Spanish economy, with estimates of a 15.5% drop in GDP this year.
Lebanon really is in a bad way, and its economy ministry is at the heart of international talks to bring this place back from the brink. This is what a collapsed economy looks like. Families evicted from homes and struggling even to afford food. This week we filmed with Elias, trying to hold his family together.
Faced with an unemployment rate of 90%, this country has become a nation of street vendors.
I'm going with, and prices are changing daily. On daily basis, prices are changing.
We need jobs, but we don't have jobs.
The economic crisis is hitting every part of Syria, regardless of territorial control, from Damascus and the southwest to Aleppo and the northwest and to the northeast. Medicine is more expensive and scarce. Food prices have skyrocketed, and the supply chains have been disrupted.
Venezuela's currency crisis now threatens the country with total economic, political and social collapse.
What I see is that the children are suffering the most. The mothers with these children in the hot sun. It's just tremendous chaos. I ask my God to help us to fix all of this.
We see now the big employers in town. Emirates Airline is cutting thousands of jobs between pilots, engineers and others. We see other employers like the hoteliers and so on, they're all cutting jobs.
Been struggling economically for over 10 years. Southern Africa as a whole in the last 4 or 5 years has not been doing very well.
18 years of economic growth evaporating in the space of 2 months. You only get a sense of the scale of this downturn when you compare it with the trajectories of every other recession in recent decades. None of them, the 70s, 90s or 2008 crash, saw much more than a 5% fall. But the data suggests the scale of this recession already dwarfs every other recession on recent record.
Take, for example, Argentina. They are Latin America's third largest economy. They are teetering on the edge of default as they struggle to repay debts from heavy government borrowing.
One day we eat and one day we don't. Everybody is sick of it. I wish they would feed us. Fine, we don't want work or salaries, but they need to feed us. We can't even afford plain bread.
The war destroyed us. The Gulf Arabs, the Saudis and the UAE destroyed us. Food prices are 10 times higher because the Yemeni rial has no value at present.
4 weeks into lockdown in France, and the country's economy is being brought to its knees.
We will probably be at more than the minus 2.2% in 2009.
The falling rupee against the US dollar has had a knock-on effect on commodity prices. The government has taken some unpopular decisions, but say it is necessary in order to stabilize Pakistan's economy. However, for consumers such as these, it means paying far more for less.
Even before the pandemic, Italy was struggling to balance its books. Now it's thought COVID-19 will cost its economy 80 billion euros.
Indonesia's economy has grown at its slowest pace in nearly 2 decades. GDP in the first quarter expanded 2.97% from a year earlier. The export-reliant economy had already been struggling with weakening investment as well as a drop in regional demand.
Rising inflation, a plummeting real. Since US sanctions were put back in place, Iranians are feeling the pinch.
Struggling with high unemployment, rising inflation, and a currency trading at 12-year lows, making it harder for Brazilians
to afford even the most basic of goods.
At the peak of the crisis, suicide rates increased dramatically, especially among men. And we might see yet another spike because more cuts are coming. In May, the government signed off its latest austerity package.
The Indian government says all is well with the economy, and if there is any slowdown, it is because of global dynamics. But in these villages, the farmers say the reasons are domestic.
Saudi Arabia has been under a lot of stress. That's why the government withdrew $23 billion from the reserve in March. This is the largest withdrawal from the reserves ever in the history of the country.
We've probably added about another 4 or 5% to the unemployment rate, and so probably the next number will be a little bit higher than this.
The problem is that nothing has changed. It has gone from bad to worse. Life is becoming harder every day. Go and see the shops. All will say, we do not have work. Everyone is suffering. All are suffering.
The March quarter had it all.
Flood, fire, drought, and now the coronavirus pandemic.
It's a bleak forecast for Somalia, which is situated in the drought-plagued Horn of Africa. Other countries in the region, including Kenya and Sudan, are also battling dry conditions and food shortages.
Turkish lira has hit a new record low, falling to 7.25 against the dollar on Thursday.
The global COVID-19 pandemic is taking a human and economic toll on Nigeria. Its main resource is oil. Demand and the market price is falling worldwide.
I can't afford to cover my family's needs currently. It is impossible for all Libyans to be able to afford to cover their family's economic needs, even if their financial situation is good. Even if someone owns a company or works as a businessman, they all have problems.
The dinar has fallen about 200% on the black market since early last year. The drop in the currency's value has accelerated inflation, which is estimated to be as much as 30%.
Corona also done enough to shore things up. And if so, what happens with regard to some of the transmission mechanisms, which can be a problem?
It is expected to slip into its worst recession since independence. The Trade and Industry Ministry has downgraded full-year contract.
It is now quite clear that the EU has entered the deepest economic recession in
Just
its
3 months ago, we were projecting 160 economies to have positive income per capita growth. Now we are projecting 170 economies
a bleak
to
report
have
from the International Monetary Fund today says the global
growth.
economy will contract by 3% this year, with highly developed economies like Canada's shrinking by more than 6%. That's $9 trillion off the global economy. They think it could be the worst downturn since the Great Depression.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
62 individuals have as much wealth as 3.5 billion people on this planet. 7 out of 10 people live in countries with greater inequality today than 30 years ago. It's gotten worse.
You can recognize that the writing is on the wall. And Pax Americana is now in irreversible decline. And the US dollar is in no man's land now, waiting to collapse.
The model we have created, where less than 5% of the world's population live here in the United States and consume more than 25% of the world's resources, and close to half the world's population lives in dire poverty, we must realize that there's only one conclusion we can reach from that, and that is that we have created a failure. This is a failed system.
Adam Smith, who's called the father of capitalism, and if he was alive today, he would spit on the men that are calling him the father of capitalism, because the capitalism that Adam Smith believed in and the capitalism that exists today has nothing to do with each other. Adam Smith, before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, wrote a book on moral sentiments, saying that the basis of commerce was morality. That every transaction is a moral transaction because it gives each of the people in the transaction a chance to honor the other and not cheat them. And this leads to a win-win situation which is necessary for civil society. That is a different type of capitalism than the type of capitalism we see when it's a dog-eat-dog world, the high price of low cost, when Walmart comes in and destroys whole communities.
In our country, 6 decades running a massive Ponzi scheme, taking from young people, giving to old people, and then telling the young people, don't worry, you'll get yours when you're old. Promising pensions, promising healthcare benefits. And, you know, this is happening in all countries.
It's a sick economy. It's a failed economic system. It's truly a death economy that's killing itself.
Well, actually, if you look more carefully at the economy, it was not on strong footing. You know, what was striking to me about the economy before the advent of the pandemic was that in spite of a $1 trillion deficit, growth was estimated to be likely to be well below 2% in 2020. That's a sign of a weak economy, not a strong economy. Investment was relatively mild. Wages were not doing very well. Incomes of ordinary Americans were not doing very well.
What happens when the next pandemic hits, or it's worse? You can't just keep printing money like that. That's not how it works. In fact, everything suggests for the past number of years that it's a controlled demolition job.
What is the American government doing? It's pursuing a policy of destabilization all over the world. And this also serves this purpose of destabilization. They are causing a lot of upheaval all over the world, and also they're causing a lot of money to find its way into the tax havens in America. The US is preparing for a big, super big financial crisis, and they want all that money in their own vaults and not in the vaults of other countries.
The Prophet told us, alayhi salatu wasalam, that the hour would not be cold until a man passes by a grave of a dead person and wishes that he was in his place. Of course, this happens due to trials, wars, calamities.
Allah has declared war on Riba. Allah has declared war on capitalism. The world is crying out to find a solution to capitalism, and only Islam has the answers.
The greatest fitna that mankind will experience from the time of Adam alayhi salam to the last day is the fitna of Dajjal.
There is no trial from the time of Adam's creation until the last hour greater than that of ad-Dajjal.
Lewis Mumford wrote a 2-volume work called The Myth of the Mega Machine. And in that book, his thesis is that basically what he calls them the axial prophets, these prophets that come around, I think about 1000 BC until Muhammad, which he considers the last of these axial prophets. And he said what these prophets do is that they're really shutting down the mega machine, this massive social project that relates to the world. The Pharaoh has his pyramids, and he's going to build them, and there's a lot of people that are going to die in the process. But definitely the prayer is something that's very frustrating for many Western people that go there, they got business to do, and the guy says that we have to stop for prayer. And Mumford saw it really as a way of shutting this thing down, because he saw it as a very negative thing. Now, one of the things that Mumford says is that there is a movement, this historical movement towards the mega machine that in prior times, its nuts and bolts were human beings, right? The whole social project. And he thinks that Pharaoh and Musa is the best archetype of this phenomenon. That Moses comes in and is directly a challenge to the pharaonic project. That the prophets literally challenge this idea that we are here for the glorification of a hierarchy. And at the top is this elite. And so the Quran uses this idea, they're called the mala, the people up, the high people, the elite.
You know, it's modern day slavery if you really think about it, brothers and sisters. Wallahi, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, we go into the cities, we go into our jobs, we go into our businesses, we do our thing, we press a few buttons, we do what they want us to do. Come Friday, you start getting fed up. What do? Saturday and Sunday, take it off. But what do non-Muslims normally end up doing on Saturday and Sunday? Enjoy yourself, go spend the money that you worked so hard to earn, put it back into the system, and come back Monday morning to repeat the cycle over again.
Arnold Toynbee wrote a book entitled Civilization on Trial. It was published in the 1940s. And in that book, this eminent British historian said, this is what Western civilization wants to do. The Khilafah state was a state which recognized Allah as Al-Malik, the sovereign. The modern state does not do that. It recognizes parliament as sovereign. It recognizes the state as sovereign. The Khilafah state recognized Allah's authority as supreme. The modern state recognizes parliament as supreme and the Supreme Court as supreme. The Khilafah state recognized Allah's law as the supreme law. If Allah made it haram, it's haram. If Allah made it halal, it's halal. The modern state says, no, we can make halal what Allah made haram. And they made banking halal. There were no banks 100 years ago. Today the banking system has taken over the world. And we will have to answer for that.
Whosoever claims sovereignty for himself, whether he is one person or it's the whole nation, they are faraina, namarida. They are doing shirk because sovereignty belongs to Allah alone. For human beings, there is khilafah, not sovereignty.
With the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and may Allah have mercy on his soul, who was Pakistani, Dr. Israr Ahmad, rahimahullah. Nobody else quotes this hadith. Sahih hadith. Yushiku an ya'ti ala an-nasi zaman. It will not be long before that time will come. La yabqa min al-Islami illa ismu. When nothing will remain of Islam but the name. And you still say we have everything in Islam. We have surrendered the market, and you still say we have Islam. We have surrendered the world of money, and you still say we have Islam.
And you will see the worst people controlling the marketplaces.
The marketplace must be, Rasul said, is a sadaqah to the people like the masjid. Like the masjid. It cannot be privatized. Never in the history of mankind. Never. The souk was privatized. Never, even before Islam. The Romans, public marketplaces. The Greeks, public marketplaces. In China, public marketplaces. In Europe, up until Second World War.
You had to turn over all your gold to the US government, which then gave it to the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank, and exchange it for you with paper, US dollars. And then after some time had passed, they changed the value of the paper dollars. You were ripped off. That's what the US government did in 1931, I think it was. They took the gold and silver out of the money, the market, and they replaced it with paper. And they tagged the paper to gold at $35 an ounce. There was the Bretton Woods Accord. There was the International Monetary Fund, 1944.
More than 70 years ago, countries all around the globe put their trust in the US dollar.
This is what they brought into the world at Bretton Woods. A monetary system through which they effected the passage from the sterling pound as the international currency to the US dollar to replace it. That is Bretton Woods. From Bretton Woods came the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
Is the economic model in which the banks reign supreme. Is a mode of central banks, fiat money, and national debt. Is a model that is endorsed by the highest degree of the legal systems, the constitutions. The constitutions that they were, after World War II, given to all the new emerging Muslim nations, creating an order in which capitalism legally will be the basis of society. Islam was pushed aside, and the only Islam that was allowed to surface was the ibadah, our worshipping, our funerals and our marriages. But the society, the social issues of Islam, they were taken away from us.
Central banking is a rather novel idea in the last 100 years, and everybody is obsessed with it. If you look at 99% of our universities, that's what they teach.
All the citizens of this country will have to use the paper currency issued by the central bank, whether they like it or not. So paper currencies were overimposed themselves over the freedom of people. And national debt was overimposed on everybody's as a matter of fact, even though there is no basis in Islamic law to support or justify that any individual may be obliged to pay the debt incurred by somebody else.
So Charles de Gaulle stood up in the French National Assembly in 1966 and he blasted them. In the French National Assembly, he blasted them.
Le fait que beaucoup d'États acceptent par principe des dollars au même titre que de l'or pour les règlements des différences qui existent à leur profit dans la balance des paiements américaine, ce fait entraîne les Américains à s'endetter et à s'endetter gratuitement vis-à-vis de l'étranger.
And he declared this to be an unjust monetary system. After Charles de Gaulle, the only other one was Dr. Mahathir.
Since dropping the gold standard in 1971, the Federal Reserve was no longer obliged to redeem the national currency for gold, effectively allowing it to print more money.
Nixon just closed the gold window, and that was the end. The dollar was no longer convertible into gold.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world.
Nixon was printing money when he shouldn't have been. What's going on? And they were worried there wasn't enough gold to honor the exchange rate of the French franc. So they sent a gunboat to New York Harbor to ever so politely ask for our gold back, please. Did they get their gold back? Go on, guess. They didn't. And the Bretton Woods system came to an end. And this is the point in which we enter the modern era of the financial system.
What the US government did in 1971 was to break the relationship of the US dollar with gold. The US government will no longer redeem gold for paper at $35 an ounce, which international law required them to do. How is it that the US dollar survived when the French attacked it, Charles de Gaulle? And in 1971, the US dollar suffered a massive, massive, massive blow when they had to renege on their obligations under international law to redeem US dollars for gold at the rate of $35 US for 1 ounce of gold. International law. And then from 71 to 73, the US dollar is in no man's land. And then came 1971 when the US government had printed too much paper and they didn't have enough paper to redeem the gold for paper at $35 an ounce. From 1971 to 1973, the US dollar was in no man's land and their monetary system was fragile, could have collapsed. And then from 1971 to 1973, the US dollar was in no man's land. It could have collapsed.
The oil from Elk Hills would only amount to about a third of that we now get from the Arab states. The situation would still be critical and would probably result in rationing of gasoline and fuel oil in this country.
And then Henry Kissinger, he's still alive. He thought he pulled off the greatest scam in history. He went to Saudi Arabia in 1973 after the war the war between Israel and the Arabs had taken place. And during that war, there was the oil boycott.
Even before today's meeting began, there was an announcement in Kuwait that prices for Arab oil were going up. A huge increase voted in an overnight meeting without even consulting Western buyers.
And the price of oil rose from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel, 400% rise in value. And the Arabs were growing very rich. And then Kissinger went to Faisal, rahimahullah, and said to him, let's make a deal. And Faisal, because he only had peanuts in his head, he accepted the deal. That Saudi Arabia will sell oil for only US dollars. The Petro Dollar was born. That's right. And the United States and the Western world became richer beyond even their wildest dreams. That's what the US dollar did to them.
Do I have to sign in Arabic now?
Yes. There were some people, some scholars of Islam in India, and India was the battleground. For the whole world of Islam, the battleground was fought in India, not Mecca, not Algeria, not Cairo, but India. That was the importance of the Indian Muslim community. And there were some scholars of Islam whose names today are forgotten because nobody considered them to be important. But those scholars of Islam stood up with courage and integrity and denounced the monetary, what was happening in the world of money. But they were like voices crying in the wilderness.
فإن لم تفعلوا فأذنوا بحرب من الله ورسوله وإن تبتم فلكم رؤوس أموالكم لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون.
Ibn Mas'ud from the Prophet ﷺ that he said, before the hour comes, riba will become widespread. And in the Sahih from Abi Hurairah, the Prophet ﷺ said, there will come a time where the person will not care where he gets his wealth from.
Why has the Lord God prohibited money being lent on interest? He answers that question in the Quran. And he says, first of all, that money being lent on interest does not qualify as business. Money being lent on interest, therefore, corrupts and destroys the free and the fair market to such an extent that wealth will no longer circulate through the economy, and the rich who lend on interest will remain permanently rich.
Two different types. One relates to interest, the other one relates to something else, to the presence or non-presence of the things that you are buying or selling or exchanging. This relates to a concept in Arabic called ayn, two concepts, ayn and dayn.
The Prophet said, Allah's blessing be upon him, a profit or a gain through deception to which you were not justly entitled. You exploited his ignorance. This is riba.
This issue of interest, it is one of the major crimes in Islam. Almighty God has announced war against. Different countries wind up in a situation what they call international debt. You've heard of foreign debt. So that countries are given money and they can't pay that money back. And so what happens, the people or the banks who have already been paid that money, another group of people go in there and take over the natural resources of that country. The people who are engaged in that conspiracy, they have entered a war against God because it amounts to injustice and oppression.
So Allah in the Quran has declared, I'm going to wage war. Me and my Prophet are going to wage war on those who are the money lenders.
There's people economically who are loving this crisis, this economic crisis. And those are the people who are taking interest. If we look at the impact of interest in the world, it is the #1 cause of social inequality, of wealth inequality.
We've used the dollar's reserve currency status not only as a weapon to try to force other countries to do what we want, but to allow the government to continue to expand. All of this has been made possible by the world subsidizing us through accepting the dollar and holding it as the reserve currency. But we are abusing that privilege. We are using it to grow our government at the expense of our economy.
But my job was to identify countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. The money, however, would not go to the country. It would go to our own corporations who would make huge profits out of building power plants, industrial parks, other big infrastructure projects that would benefit a few wealthy families in that country who own the industries and the commercial establishments. But the majority of the people would suffer terribly as a result, because money would be diverted from education, healthcare, and other social services to pay interest on the debt. In the end, the principal on the debt was never bought down.
Dethroning the dollar, America is weaponizing its currency and financial system. Its use of sanctions could endanger the dollar in the long term. And I have all this data. In particular, I like this chart at the bottom. That's the increase in the amount of sanctions applied to various countries around the world. We do control the financial grid, especially since 1971. And you know, the fact is that we were very benign dictators, benign controllers of that grid for a very long time, until people started having their own ideas about their own individual economic sovereignty, and now we punish them.
The truth is, inflation is made in one place and one place only, here in Washington. This is the only place where there are presses like this that turn out these pieces of paper we call money. This is a place where the power resides to determine how rapidly the amount of money shall increase.
Venezuela is dumping the dollar when it comes to official exchange transactions and will now use the euro or other convertible currencies instead. The move is retaliation for severe American financial sanctions imposed on the country's officials, including the president. Though Caracas is not alone in moving away from dollar dependence.
Let us be free. We will not be anyone's colony again.
It was my job to corrupt them. I couldn't do it. And so when that happens, the jackals come in. And these are people that either overthrow governments or assassinate the leaders. And in the case of both Roldos of Ecuador and Torrijos of Panama, they were assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals because I failed.
This bogus, this fraudulent, this utterly haram monetary system of paper, plastic, and electronic money is an instrument of slavery. As the value of the money falls, and they can attack your money anytime they want. And when they attack your money, your value of your money is going to fall. And as the value of the money falls, there is a disease that then attacks you and paralyzes you. It's called inflation. But turn to gold dinar and silver dirham, and there is no such thing as inflation. Never was, never will be. They know that. And as inflation attacks you, it destroys you, it paralyzes you. That's where we are today.
We have created the foundation for hyperinflation already.
And if you step out of line, they destroy your money. Hugo Chavez, with much less courage and integrity, stepped out of line and challenged them. Today, the Venezuelan Bolivar is destroyed. It's called inflation.
According to today's rate, for just $1 US, I can get, attention, 11,000 tons of fuel. Sounds absurd, right? With hyperinflation here in the country, a week later, for the same amount, I would be able to get even more than that.
Annual inflation has topped 1 million%, and in an attempt to curb it,
5 zeros have been knocked off the currency's value.
The gasoline is cheap, but people are starving. We don't get proper health care.
He has also been accused of helping Venezuela make deals with Iran to exchange gold for oil, despite crushing U.S. sanctions on both countries.
They either assassinate the leaders of the country or overthrow them in coups.
The brutal repression of the Venezuelan people must end, and it must end soon. People are starving. They have no food. They have no water. And this was once one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So we wish them well. We'll be there to help, and we are there to help.
According to the Associated Press reports, it was a former U.S. Special Operations officer named Jordan Gaudreau who worked with retired Venezuelan military leaders to plan an invasion. They planned to use 300 Venezuelan military defectors to seize the capital within 96 hours. Now, that's easy to dismiss as a conspiracy theory, except we have video evidence. Here is ex-Green Beret Jordan Gaudreau explaining and confirming the existence of Operation Gideon.
A daring amphibious raid was launched from the border of Colombia deep into the heart of Caracas. Our men are continuing to fight right now.
A lot of the policies that we have put in place has kind of helped lead the devastation in Venezuela, particular bullying and the use of sanctions to eventually intervene and make regime change really does not help the people of countries like Venezuela.
Shame on you to use trade and business as a weapon. Shame on you. This is the voice of the world of Islam saying, shame on you, because we are not like that, not in Islam. We stand for a free and a fair market with no privileges for anyone. No Muslim has an advantage over a non-Muslim.
Other sovereign governments, other members of the United Nations, are literally stealing Venezuela's gold and money.
The United States temporarily suspended Iraqi central bank's account in New York because of concerns that the money was going to Iran.
When all else fails, the economic hitmen and the jackals, then and only then do we send in the military.
Disclosing for the first time that Iran has another secret facility in Tehran, a secret atomic warehouse for storing massive amounts of equipment and material from Iran's secret nuclear weapons program.
And so in this way, we've managed to create this global empire in a subtle way. And it's a very dangerous process we've gone through here, because most people living in the United States have no idea that we've been doing this.
Our empire that we have out there, although we don't claim ownership to it, it's a lot of money and a lot of influence, and we threaten with weapons and we use sanctions to hold our empire together. I think that's coming to an end.
The number of dollars printed, created by Barack Obama and his administration is in the region of way in excess of 23 trillion US dollars. This is the biggest theft we have witnessed, the largest theft of wealth in the history of mankind. For this money of the Americans, not only allow the industry and their banks to be bailed out. Wall Street was bailed out. Not only that, who bailed out America? China, India, Europe, and Indonesia too.
Trump has made it far worse. He's been adding annually far more debt, $185 billion a year, than any other president.
It's a strange kind of a money, as though it's leaking. It's losing value. It is suffering from a virus called inflation.
We know that there's a bubble coming, and I see everything we do as a big bubble. And all those QEs that we have dealt with in these last 8 years have just created a huge bubble. And everything is in excess, whether it's our military budget, our overseas engagements, whether it's the welfare state, and that bubble will come to an end. You may know the direction of the country, but you don't know whether it's going to be tomorrow or next year. There will be some event that will pop up, and the fragility of the economy will all of a sudden become apparent, and there'll be a rush to the exits, and this has to be reversed. We will have to pay for our extravagance.
Quantitative easing, and they just expand the amount of money by so many $1 trillion, and as this rate of expansion accelerates, the balloon is becoming bigger and bigger.
And in 1999, I said in 2016 the market would crash, but it didn't crash. And there's many reasons why it didn't crash. One reason was I didn't foresee quantitative easing.
The dollar is going to collapse because the only value that it has is confidence. But how can you have confidence in a currency where the government is going to have to print so much of it because it has so much debt? The national debt is really a pile of unpaid bills. And the reason we're raising the ceiling is because we can't pay our bills and we have to borrow more money so that we can pretend that we can.
But I don't want it to collapse, for one, because when empires collapse, you get a void, and you get wars, either physical wars or economic wars, and you get a new empire.
Our American partners are making a colossal strategic mistake, undermining the credibility of the dollar as a universal and essentially the only reserve currency, undermining trust in it. They're cutting the branch they're sitting on. This is a typical mistake of any empire when people think that nothing will happen. They believe that everything is so powerful, so strong, so stable that there will be no negative consequences. But no, they will come sooner or later.
So they're printing like crazy, and they can't wean the system off. There's too many withdrawal symptoms.
And I gave him a $100 bill, and he was looking like that. I said, man, you're never going to spot the counterfeit on that, because the one that counterfeited that is so good at it, it looks exactly like a real dollar. He said, he looked at me like I was crazy. I said, the U.S. Treasury counterfeited that, man. It's not backed by anything. It's not backed by gold. It's not backed by silver. It's not even backed by debt anymore. They're just printing it up, churning it out, trillions of dollars, bailing out all of these fat cats. I mean, Jesse James and Frank James had nothing on the bank robbers today. They used to go in with their faces covered. These guys are on the board of the banks. Seriously, they don't need to cover their faces. They're on the boards of the banks. They've got the congressman facilitating the robbery.
And it's going to lead to a horrible day of reckoning.
Those who call themselves the masters of the universe, who are already trying to plan the future economy.
I was actually surprised when I learned that at Bretton Woods, Britain wanted to have a monetary system with only one paper currency for the whole world. The United States of America said, hold it, not so fast. You don't want them to see the face of the snake, huh? Try to bring back real money, because tomorrow there'll be only one currency for all of mankind.
And I think we need to radically change our financial system, because we have two big problems, and this is true in every country, including Russia. The traditional banking system, the model is one of very high leverage. Banks borrow a lot of money, promise to repay, and then there's opacity. They take the money and they do something with it, but they don't tell you what they're doing with it. So people get very concerned at some points.
Unfortunately, I fear that there are some major trends, and in a recent publication I discussed what I call the 10 deadly Ds. They're going to lead us to a greater depression sometime later in this decade. It's only a matter of when, not whether. And I think that even if we're going to do monetary and fiscal stimulus or reform, I think the train has left the station, and the train wreck is a slow motion one.
We live, therefore, in a time that is paving the way for the coming of this person called ad-Dajjal. Ad-Dajjal literally means the liar, the deceiver. And this deceiver cannot deceive people so perfectly until a road or an environment has been prepared for his coming. He can't just go in like that. It has to be prepared.
Imagine my frustration when the most dangerous problem that Dajjal has
attacked us with, targeted us with at this moment is money. And they can't recognize, no.
The Treasury opened up its window to help. They pumped $105 billion in the system and quickly realized that they could not stem the tide. We were having an electronic run on the banks. They decided to close the operation, close down the money accounts, and announce a guarantee of $250,000 per account so there wouldn't be further panic out there. And that's what actually happened. If they had not done that, their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours the world economy would have collapsed. Now, we talked at that time about what would happen if that happened. It would have been the end of our economic system and our political system as we know it.
You know, whether you see it as the system that's been put into place before the arrival of Dajjal, whatever way you see it, the fact is that this dunya is distracting us and deceiving us and deluding us from our Creator. It's taking us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a world of deception. And the only way we can truly protect ourselves in this time, brothers and sisters, is if we were to hold on to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again. Those who rule over us in the world of Sunni Islam are usually in the pockets of the slave master.
The direct colonial rule came to an end. But an indirect rule, a remote control is there. Our resources are exploited by others. Our policies are dictated by others. Our economies are controlled somewhere else.
If anybody wanted to free Palestine, all you have to do is to end capitalism. If you eliminate capitalism, you liberate all the lands of Islam. Because the problem is not in Palestine, the problem is in Pakistan. And in Saudi Arabia, is they are ruled by capitalism. The capitalism that you find, the ATMs that you find in Islamabad, they are the same ones that you would find in Dallas, or in Paris, or anywhere else. The national debt, the principle of national debt is identical in Iran as it is in Malaysia, as it is in Congo. The system is identical. The mortgages are exactly the same, etc., etc., etc. The credit cards, blah, blah, blah. So what you need is to identify the cause, the fundamental problem that we have today. Your first question, what is the fitna? What is the cause of the fitna?
When Iraq is denied its currency, what will be your state and what will you do? When Asham, when its currency is denied? And what will you do when Egypt, its currency will be denied? And you return to where you began in the first place. You think it's over for Egypt right now? According to this hadith, which is in Bukhari and Muslim, something else is coming up. When the currency of a nation falls, it means that the country itself falls. The Rasul was asked, how will it fall? And he said, by foreign intervention.
The Dajjal will come at a time of great chaos, bloodshed, hunger, starvation, and he will provide his followers safety and security. This explains why so many people will follow the Dajjal. You see, Alhamdulillah, most of us have never been hungry to the point of us going almost mad. We don't understand. When you are hungry, you lose rationale. When you cannot feed yourself or your children, you will do desperate things. May Allah protect us from ever seeing that day. The people of that time frame will be tested by trial, war, bloodshed, hunger, starvation. Here comes a man who appears to be powerful in terms of his army, who will grant you safety and security if you are on his side. Our Prophet ﷺ said, he will command the skies to rain and they will rain. Our Prophet ﷺ said, he will distribute bread and food. One of his signs, he will be giving food left, right, and center at a time of starvation.
And then the people are going to hear that a God has come, that God, an Ilah, has come, and that he has with him bread the size of mountains. So whoever goes and whoever believes in him, he's going to give him money, he's going to give him wealth, he's going to give him food, he's going to give him animals. And whoever disbelieves in him, he's going to have a tough time.
ألهاكم التكاثر حتى زرتم المقابر كلا سوف تعلمون ثم كلا سوف تعلمون كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين لترون الجحيم ثم لترونها عين اليقين ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم.
The markets, like the mosques, they cannot be privatized. The marketplaces must be accessible and open to the people, just like we do with the mosques. When Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went to Medina, he made a mosque and he made a market. He laid down the rules of the mosque and he laid down the rules of the market. He said, the rules of the market are like the rules of the masjid. Everybody must have access to it. There is no fees, there is no taxes, there is no membership.
And they questioned me a lot, and they pointed out that Arnold Toynbee, the great British historian, in 1954 had written a book called Civilization on Trial, which said that in the long run, the Muslim people are the biggest threat to capitalism, to the U.S. way. Back in 54, he said it isn't communism. That's not ultimately a threat because it's not spiritual enough. It's not based in any real strong principles. For a culture to succeed, it has to be very principled. And he demised the fall of capitalism, what he called the West, because he said ultimately we won't be that principled either. And that the Islamic world would rise up because they have these strong beliefs in spirituality. They don't believe in usury, and they don't believe in lending money.
The Jews have abandoned their economic injunctions. The Christians have abandoned their economic injunctions. It's in the Old Testament. They know usury is prohibited in the Old Testament, but nobody talks about it. Muwatta of Imam Malik, 2/3 of that book deal with economic matters. Medina was a place of transactions. Until we begin to address these problems and the fundamental core issues of these problems, we need societies that are committed to law and order, but you can't have societies that are committed to law and order when there are people above the law.
The science of the dinar and the dirham and tijara in Islam, this science is called Muamalat, not economy. Economy is a pseudoscience, an ideology from the West. Is based on riba is halal. This is the foundational argument. Banks are good. Riba is good. This is foundational. Therefore, it is impossible to speak about Islamic economics. Contradiction. It's like saying Islamic communism or Islamic atheism. It's impossible. It's a contradiction.
And so we have a definition of money from the Quran and Sunnah, that money in Islam is always money in which the value of the money is located inside the money. Because some people have difficulty with the use of the word intrinsic.
They have no inflation. One chicken at the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam cost 1 dirham, and today you can buy one chicken in Britain for approximately 1 dirham. 1,400 years later, and the price is the same. The same is applicable to gold. So commodities against commodities that remain stable. If you compare that with the paper currency, Even the mighty US dollar has lost 95% of its value in the last 50 years.
If today the British pound collapsed and you have £50,000 saved in your safe at home, when the pound collapses, you open your safe, what will that paper be worth? The paper will be worth nothing. But with that £50,000, if you bought gold and silver, and the economy collapsed, and you opened your safe, will that gold and silver have value? The answer is yes.
What's real money is gold and silver. You know, gold and silver are God's money. God made them. I'm not really religious, but God made that money. It's unlike Bitcoin, unlike the dollar or the peso or the yen.
Islam has a saying, has something to say about money. We do not impose gold and silver. What we proclaim is the freedom of people to choose gold and silver or platinum or whatever they wish. This is endorsed by the ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, trade with mutual consent.
As the raw material from which their cigarettes are made. But in the early days of the colonies, long before the United States was established, this was money. It was a common money of Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas. It was used for all sorts of things. The legislature voted that it could be used legally to pay taxes. It was used to buy food, clothing, and housing.
Helping the people to get rid of capitalism. And then you will find that we are part. Then we're in the front line. Then we will have sympathy from them. And actually we will have a voice. Because Islam defines not only just what is anti-capitalism, but much more important, what is the alternative? We have the blueprint. Unlike the kuffar do not have. They can tell you capitalism is bad, but when it comes to the answers, to the alternatives, what is the solution? You find a lot of different versions. We have the blueprint of the perfect version of this, which is, again, public marketplaces, guilds, gold and silver, and many other elements which conform the what we call Muamalat.
Unfortunately, they don't know why it's happening or who it is. They speculate. The 1%, the Illuminati, or whoever, but the fact is they don't know why and are confused. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.